I was mocked in divorce court for being a pregnant housewife. Then the judge said this. The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. Only the soft shuffle of paper and the occasional murmur broke the tension that hung in the air. Ava stood just behind her assigned bench, her hands resting gently on her swollen stomach, as if shielding her unborn child from the hostilities surrounding them. Her husband, Nathan, sat across the room, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. He didn't look at her. He was too busy laughing with his attorney, as if this were just another business meeting. Her eyes scanned the room and met stares of quiet judgment. Some whispered about her condition. Others smirked, recognizing her from the local media coverage about Nathan's successful tech company. The woman standing alone now was not the image they expected to see beside a man they called a genius. The judge entered, calling the room to order, and everyone sat. Ava's chair creaked beneath her as she lowered herself slowly, her discomfort only worsened by the cold stares. Her heart raced, not from nerves, but from the weight of everything that had brought her here. 3 years of marriage, a home she built from scratch, and a child on the way. It was supposed to be a future crafted with love. Instead, it had become a court battle for dignity. She had no lawyer. Nathan had told her early on, "You won't need one. We'll make this easy." But the moment she discovered his affair and his plans to cut her out of everything they built, she knew nothing would be easy again. Today would be the beginning of a new kind of fight, one she had never imagined. Nathan sat with an air of absolute control, legs crossed, watching the judge with a half-smile that belonged more in a boardroom than a courtroom. His attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Dana, adjusted her blazer and leaned in confidently as proceedings began. "Your Honor," she said, "we are here today because my client seeks a fair and swift divorce." The marriage was brief, and unfortunately, not mutually beneficial. She cast a glance at Ava, pausing dramatically before continuing. "My client was the sole provider. The respondent, Ava Caldwell, has never worked during their time together. She contributed no income, no assets, and has no documented stake in his business. Furthermore, she is pregnant, which complicates matters, but does not entitle her to claim what she never earned." Ava flinched but kept her face still. Her cheeks burned. The words were calculated, sharp, and rehearsed. She had expected this kind of attack, but nothing could prepare her for the way Dana's words turned her into a burden in the eyes of the court. Nathan didn't react. His arms were folded, as if he were bored. Ava sat up straighter. She had spent 3 years supporting him emotionally, managing his home life, organizing his investor dinners, and sacrificing her teaching career. But none of that was on paper. No paycheck, no title, no equity. Her value had been invisible, and now it was being erased altogether. She knew if she didn't speak soon, the court would accept this version of the truth, that she had simply sat at home, doing nothing, waiting to be paid for existing. Dana stood and walked slowly toward the judge's bench, her voice calm but cutting. She claims to have supported her husband emotionally, but there is no record of contribution to his company. No emails, no financial involvement, no strategic input. Just a woman who cooked dinners and hosted parties. Now, she demands half of everything. The courtroom responded with quiet laughter, stifled behind hands and sideways glances. Ava's fingers gripped her chair tightly. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, but her voice felt caught in her throat. "She seeks alimony," Dana continued, "on the basis that she's pregnant. Yet, she has no medical condition that would prevent her from finding employment. My client should not be held financially hostage simply because she chose to stay at home." Ava stared at Dana, her eyes wide. "I chose to stay at home," she whispered to herself, bitterness rising. She had put aside her ambitions because Nathan had asked her to. "Just until things stabilize," he had said. "I need you by my side." She had believed him. She had believed in their future. And now, every sacrifice was being twisted into a liability. Ava looked at the judge, who remained neutral, unreadable. But she saw something in his eyes, something observant, perhaps even skeptical of Dana's polished arguments. Still, it didn't stop the humiliation. Ava's pregnancy was now being paraded like a tactic, her value assessed like a failed investment. She pressed her palm against her belly, grounding herself in the truth: this child was not a weapon. This child was her reason to fight. Before she was Mrs. Caldwell, Ava Montgomery was a well-regarded middle school literature teacher. Her classroom walls had been covered in quotes from her favorite books, and her students always remembered her for the way she brought stories to life. She had plans: graduate school, publishing a curriculum series, maybe even starting an education nonprofit someday. But then she met Nathan at a tech conference she attended out of curiosity. He was ambitious, charming, full of wild dreams about reshaping e-commerce. They talked for hours that first night, and within 6 months, he had moved into her apartment. Another 6, and they were married. "We're a team," he used to say. And Ava, captivated by the idea of building something meaningful together, left her teaching job to support him full-time. The transition wasn't easy. Going from lesson plans to logistics, from grading essays to helping prepare investor pitch decks, was disorienting. But she adapted. She organized his schedule, managed their social events, revised his presentations, and even wrote content for his company's early blog. None of it came with a job title or compensation. It was simply what she did to help the man she loved succeed. She told herself it was temporary, that once the company found its footing, she'd return to the classroom. But months turned to years, and Nathan never once encouraged her to go back. When she brought it up, he dismissed it. "Why go back to that? You're helping me build something bigger." And she believed him. Until the day she realized she was building something she'd never own. Those early startup years were filled with chaos and caffeine, but also laughter and ambition. They held investor meetings in their tiny living room, where Ava would prepare appetizers and serve wine, always playing the supportive spouse. She designed his first business logo, helped him hire his first assistant, and even ran payroll when the accountant flaked. But as the business grew, Nathan's tone shifted. "This is getting too big for you to manage," he told her one night when she offered to oversee the HR system. "I'll hire a professional. You've done enough." He said it with a smile, but something in his voice stung. Ava nodded and stepped aside, believing it was just part of scaling. She didn't realize it was the beginning of her being phased out. The more successful Nathan became, the less he involved Ava. He traveled without her, stopped asking her opinion, and started treating her like an afterthought. He built an empire with her at his side and then began rewriting the history without her in it. By the time she found out she was pregnant, she had already felt like a ghost in her own home. She told him the news with trembling hands, hoping it would bring them closer again. Instead, he sighed and muttered, "That's not great timing." The excitement she felt drained instantly. He didn't even look up from his laptop. She knew then that their marriage had become transactional. And in this courtroom, it had officially become a transaction he wanted out of, with as little cost to himself as possible. As the weeks passed after sharing the pregnancy news, Ava noticed subtle shifts that quickly became unbearable. Nathan stopped coming home early and often returned late with half-hearted excuses about work. His phone, once left unattended on kitchen counters, never left his side now. Ava, once included in every aspect of his growing company, was now excluded from even basic conversations about their household. "I'm too tired to talk," he'd say, scrolling through emails during dinner. His warmth had turned mechanical. His gaze, once curious and loving, now carried a disinterest that made Ava feel like furniture, present, functional, and easy to ignore. Worse than his silence were the passive comments disguised as jokes. "I guess you're officially a stay-at-home expert now," he said one morning as she packed his lunch, not even glancing at her. When she asked about joining a part-time course for mothers returning to work, he laughed. "What for? You're not going back anytime soon." These jabs stung more than open arguments because they chipped away at her sense of self-worth. He saw her as someone who no longer contributed, though she was the one managing their home, his meals, their social calendar, and now, the early stages of pregnancy. Her sacrifices had become his excuses for diminishing her. When Ava visited her OB/GYN for the first ultrasound, she went alone. Nathan had promised to come but canceled last minute, claiming an urgent call with investors. As the doctor showed her the heartbeat on the monitor, Ava felt a mixture of wonder and sadness. This child, whose tiny heart beat so fiercely, was growing in a household that had grown cold. On the drive home, she placed the ultrasound photo on the passenger seat where Nathan was supposed to sit. She stared at it during red lights, imagining a life where this photo would be cherished, not ignored like a forgotten grocery list. That night, she tried to show Nathan the picture. He glanced at it briefly, muttered "cool," and returned to his laptop. No questions, no smile, no hand on her belly. "You could try pretending to care," she said, her voice cracking. He looked up. "Don't start, Ava. You wanted this kid more than I did." The words hit harder than any slap. She stood in the doorway for a moment, stunned, then walked upstairs without another word. From that moment, she stopped expecting emotional support. She would raise this child, even if she had to do it alone. But she didn't know yet how much more alone she would feel in the days ahead. The confirmation of Nathan's betrayal didn't come as a surprise, it came as a cruel validation of every suspicion Ava had tried to silence. Late one night, as he showered, his phone lit up on the nightstand. A message from someone named Mel appeared. "Can't wait for our weekend. I love you." Her stomach tightened. She unlocked the phone and scrolled. Dozens of messages followed, painting a picture of a relationship that had been going on for months. Weekend trips under the pretense of client meetings, romantic dinners, inside jokes, all shared with another woman, while Ava had been home managing prenatal vitamins and back pain alone. She didn't confront him that night. She stared at the phone, her heart pounding in her ears, and wondered what she had become. A placeholder. A distraction. A woman used up in private so he could impress the world in public. When he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, she looked him in the eye and said quietly, "I know." For a brief moment, his eyes widened. Then he smirked. "So what now?" he asked. The arrogance in his voice stunned her. He didn't beg or lie. He had already decided she didn't matter. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake in bed beside him, already planning her escape, not from the marriage, but from the silence that had devoured her life. 2 weeks later, Nathan handed her divorce papers with all the casualness of passing a receipt. "Let's just get this over with," he said. Ava didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked at the papers and saw how he'd crafted the narrative to suit his ambitions, offering her nothing, claiming she contributed nothing, treating her pregnancy as an afterthought. "There's no reason for drama," he added, pouring himself a drink. "We're adults." Ava stared at him, remembering the man she'd married, and realizing he had vanished long ago. The person standing before her now was someone she didn't recognize, and didn't need to keep recognizing. She didn't sign. She didn't even touch the pen. Instead, she stood and walked out of the room. Not out of fear, but with a newfound clarity. She might not have a lawyer or financial power, but she had the truth, and she had her child. She moved into the guest room that night, refusing to argue or explain. In her heart, the separation was already real. She spent the following days collecting receipts, gathering emails, and revisiting memories she had once dismissed as ordinary. She wasn't just preparing for a divorce. She was preparing for a reckoning. Nathan thought she would quietly leave. But Ava had lived quietly long enough. The courtroom that day was cold, emotionally, not physically. The people inside it treated the divorce like routine, but to Ava, it was the culmination of years of love, sacrifice, and now, betrayal. Dana's voice filled the room once more. "This is a matter of financial structure. Nothing more. My client, Mr. Caldwell, has the right to protect the assets he created. Miss Montgomery made no documented contribution to his success." Ava remained silent, her hands gently cupping her pregnant belly, her back straight. The judge looked at her occasionally, perhaps waiting for her to object, but she didn't. Not yet. The courtroom watched with a mix of amusement and detachment. No one expected her to speak. She was, after all, just the pregnant housewife being discarded by a rising entrepreneur. "Your Honor," Dana concluded, "we request that no alimony or business division be granted, and that sole ownership of Caldwell Innovations remain with my client." Ava looked around the room and realized they believed her silence confirmed their narrative. But she wasn't silent because she was weak. She was silent because she was waiting for the right moment. One that would turn their certainty into doubt, and their laughter into regret. That moment was closer than anyone expected. Judge Harrington had presided over hundreds of divorce cases in his long career, but something about this one made him pause. He observed Ava with a kind of quiet scrutiny. She didn't look broken, she looked measured, like a woman gathering strength rather than surrendering it. He noted how she didn't flinch when the attorney mocked her as financially irrelevant or dependent. Instead, she sat with her hands gently resting on her stomach, her eyes locked forward. She didn't plead for sympathy. She didn't interrupt. That kind of composure wasn't born from weakness, it was the kind that came from surviving more than others ever noticed. The judge glanced over at Nathan. His body language radiated self-satisfaction, as if the outcome had already been sealed by his wealth and the sharp tongue of his attorney. His smile lingered too long. His confidence bordered on arrogance. Harrington had seen that before, in men who believed success replaced decency. He knew this case wasn't just about assets, it was about erasure. Something about Ava's silence told him that there was more beneath the surface, and he intended to hear it. When the defense rested, he leaned forward and finally turned his attention to Ava. "Would you like to speak now, Ms. Montgomery?" he asked. Before Ava could answer, Dana stood abruptly. "Your Honor, my client prefers to resolve this without further conflict. Ms. Montgomery's testimony is unnecessary." Judge Harrington raised a hand to silence her. "This court will decide what's necessary." All eyes turned to Ava. She rose slowly, not out of reluctance, but because the weight she carried, physically and emotionally, made quick movements difficult. With each step to the front of the room, she felt the stares, but they no longer mattered. This was her moment, and she intended to be heard, not pitted. Before she spoke, the doors in the back opened quietly, and an unfamiliar woman entered. She made her way to the clerk, whispered something, and was handed a form. "Your Honor," the clerk called softly, "we have a last-minute request for a character witness." "She insists it's important." Ava turned, confused. The woman stepped forward, introduced herself as Lila Brown, former operations coordinator at Caldwell Innovations. "I worked directly with both Nathan and Ava," she said. "And I can assure you, Ava wasn't just a wife. She was the backbone of that company's first 2 years." A ripple spread through the courtroom as Nathan's expression darkened for the first time. Ava stood tall as the judge allowed her to speak. Her voice was steady, though not without emotion. "Your Honor, I've been called a leech, a dependent, and someone who made no contribution. So let me tell you what I actually did. I designed the first pitch deck that secured Nathan's first $50,000 investor. I managed the household so he could work 15-hour days. I handled early payroll when our accountant quit. I even rewrote entire web content when the marketing team backed out last minute. I was never on payroll. I didn't sign contracts. But I showed up every day, building something that I believed belonged to both of us." She reached into her folder and handed the judge a printed email, dated 2 years ago. This was from Nathan, thanking me for saving a deal after a presentation disaster. He said, and I quote, "I couldn't have done this without you. You're my silent co-founder." She paused to look around the courtroom. "I didn't ask to be paid. I asked to be included. Instead, I was erased." There was no tremble in her voice anymore. She wasn't pleading. She was reclaiming space. For the first time, the room grew truly quiet, not out of protocol, but because the truth, when spoken plainly, demands silence. With the email still in the judge's hands, Ava continued. "I cooked meals at midnight for team members who stayed late in our living room. I organized investor brunches and even drove across town to deliver contracts Nathan forgot. I took care of everything, laundry, groceries, his schedule, so he could focus entirely on the company. And when I found out I was pregnant, I did it all while vomiting every morning and lying awake each night, wondering if I'd be a single mother before the baby was even born. But none of that is in the financials. None of that fits on a balance sheet." Ava looked directly at Nathan now. "You told everyone I was just a housewife. You told them I held you back. But the truth is, I gave you the freedom to become who you are. I kept the home that let you chase your dreams. You didn't build that home alone, I did. While you were shaking hands with investors, I was keeping the lights on. I believed in you when no one else did. But belief isn't blindness. And today, I see clearly." Nathan's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. His smirk was gone. All that remained was a man watching the version of events he had crafted crumble piece by piece. For the first time since the hearing began, the courtroom shifted emotionally. The energy that once felt dismissive now hung heavy with discomfort. Those who had snickered earlier now looked down or avoided Ava's eyes entirely. Even Dana looked uneasy, flipping through her notes with forced calm. Judge Harrington leaned back slightly, taking it all in. "Ms. Brown," he asked the witness, "can you confirm Ava's involvement in these matters?" Without hesitation, Lila replied, every word. And there's more. She helped structure our hiring process, drafted supplier agreements, and proofread financial reports. We just didn't put her name on anything. That was Nathan's choice. Nathan opened his mouth to object, but the judge raised a hand. You'll have your turn. He turned back to Ava. Is there anything else you'd like to submit? Ava nodded and handed over a folder containing receipts, calendar entries, emails, and even printed drafts of the early company logo, designed on Ava's old laptop. The judge examined them slowly, thoughtfully. No one dared interrupt. This court, he said finally, recognizes contribution in all its forms. And sometimes, the most essential work leaves no trail of invoices, but none of impact. Ava sat down again, exhausted but grounded. The courtroom hadn't just heard her story. It had felt it. And something told her, things would never be the same again. Judge Harrington adjusted his glasses as he opened the letter Ava had submitted along with her other documents. It was handwritten, folded carefully, and dated nearly 2 years prior. The courtroom watched silently as he read the opening lines. Nathan's handwriting was unmistakable. Ava, I don't say this enough, but I couldn't have gotten this far without you. You're the glue holding all of this together. You may not be in the office, but you're my stability, my clarity. The judge paused and looked up, meeting Nathan's eyes. Mr. Caldwell, is this your letter? Nathan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, but it was personal, he muttered. Personal or not, the judge replied calmly, it confirms what this court now understands. Ms. Montgomery's contributions may not have been measured in wages, but they were foundational. Murmurs spread again across the gallery. Nathan looked away, jaw tight. He hadn't expected this to go beyond paperwork and cold calculations. But Ava had brought proof, not just of actions, but of intention. She hadn't come to play the victim, she had come to tell the truth, even if it made the man she once loved squirm under the weight of it. That letter, born from a moment of genuine gratitude, now served as undeniable evidence of all he had tried to erase. Ava's folder was more than just a defense, it was a timeline of their shared journey. She had collected early-stage contracts signed at her request, payment schedules she had managed when Nathan traveled, and even grocery receipts with notations indicating meals she prepared for investor events. These aren't glamorous documents, she told the court, but they tell the story of someone who was present, invested, and responsible when it mattered most. Judge Harrington examined the receipts, clearly impressed by the meticulous organization. How long have you been preparing this? He asked. Since the night he handed me the divorce papers, Ava answered quietly. The financial records painted a portrait of Ava not as a bystander, but as an active partner. While Nathan's team had tried to strip her of credibility by citing the absence of a paycheck, Ava's trail of unpaid labor told a different story, one of devotion, sacrifice, and strategic support. Her documentation, mundane as it appeared, was damning in its detail. Each receipt and email disrupted the false narrative of dependency. Dana attempted to interject with objections, but the judge silenced her with a sharp glance. Counsel, he said, this court is well within its rights to recognize non-financial contributions as legitimate support in a marriage, especially when they directly enabled the growth of an enterprise. After a moment of silence, Judge Harrington looked around the courtroom. Are there any other individuals who wish to offer testimony regarding Ms. Montgomery's role? A quiet shuffle of movement came from the back. A man in a gray blazer stepped forward. I wasn't on the witness list, he said, but I worked with Nathan in the early days. Ava helped me finalize my onboarding when no one else had time. She even corrected our first hiring contracts. She made sure we got paid when payroll got delayed. We used to call her the real COO. Laughter followed the statement, not mocking this time, but warm, almost reverent. Eva blinked in surprise. She remembered the man, Jonas, from the early team. She had no idea he still thought of her that way. More team members began to nod quietly in the audience. It became apparent that Eva had left an impact on more than just Nathan. She had built relationships, solved problems, and earned respect in a world that never officially included her. For the first time, Nathan's image of control began to crack. His empire, founded on image and convenience, now stood side by side with a history of neglecting the very woman who helped him build it. No investor pitch could undo that truth. Nathan sat unnervingly still, but his facade was clearly unraveling. The smug posture he'd worn all morning was now stiff with tension. His jaw clenched. He tugged at his collar. Dana leaned in to whisper something, but he didn't respond. The weight of the evidence was now undeniable. Eva had made him look not only dishonest but ungrateful, and worse, incapable of acknowledging the emotional and practical debt he owed. The judge watched him closely. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "you will have an opportunity to respond. But be advised, this court does not reward selective memory or arrogance." Nathan finally spoke, his voice tight. "I never denied that Eva helped. But this is being blown out of proportion. None of this would have existed without me. The vision, the risk, the capital, all mine." Eva didn't flinch. She'd heard that line too many times. The judge remained impassive. "You built a company, Mr. Caldwell. But you built it in a home your wife maintained, while she put her dreams on hold and her health at risk. Your actions in the months since your separation, filing for divorce, refusing support, and withholding assets, paint a picture not of independence, but of betrayal." Nathan said nothing. He had nothing left that could be said without proving the judge's point. The courtroom waited in breathless silence as Judge Harrington gathered his notes and looked over the evidence one last time. "This case," he began, "is not just about legal documents or financial statements. It's about truth. And the truth is, Ms. Montgomery did not simply support her husband, she enabled his success. Her unpaid labor, emotional support, and organizational oversight directly contributed to the growth of Caldwell Innovations. Her lack of compensation was not due to lack of effort, but lack of recognition." He paused, letting the words sink into every corner of the courtroom. "Therefore," he continued, his tone firm, "this court awards Ms. Montgomery 50% of all assets accrued during the marriage, including company equity. In addition, she will receive alimony for the duration of 1 year post-birth and retain shared custody of the child, with Mr. Caldwell expected to contribute financially and participate actively. Furthermore, an official apology will be written and read in this courtroom before this hearing is adjourned." A collective gasp followed. Nathan turned pale. Eva, stunned but composed, pressed her hand to her belly and closed her eyes for a moment. It wasn't just about winning. It was about being seen. Finally, she had been. Eva sat motionless as the judge's ruling echoed through the courtroom, each word landing like a slow, steady drumbeat. She didn't smile or cry, her reaction was more internal, like a silent wave passing through her. Her eyes focused on the wooden grain of the table before her, grounding herself in the moment. The courtroom remained still, processing what had just been decided. Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring blankly ahead. His posture had lost its edge, his face a pale mask. The man who had once commanded rooms now looked like a statue cracked by truth. Judge Harrington handed down the final orders, reminding both parties that dignity in transition was expected. "Mr. Caldwell, you will remain present until your apology is delivered," he instructed. "Dismissal will follow after that." Dana didn't speak. She gathered her documents slowly, a flicker of resignation in her expression. Ava exhaled through her nose, the weight of months beginning to lift, but she knew it wasn't over yet. There was still one last moment to face. Nathan, the man she had once loved beyond measure, would now be forced to do the one thing he had always avoided: take responsibility with his own voice. The judge called for a brief recess to allow the court clerk to draft the formal apology, as required. When the court resumed, Nathan stood reluctantly. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. He cleared his throat but didn't look at Ava. "I, Nathan Caldwell," he began, "acknowledge that I have failed to recognize the contributions of my former wife, Ava Montgomery, both within our marriage and in the early development of my company. Her dedication, sacrifice, and support were vital to my success, and I deeply regret having disregarded her efforts." A hushed quiet stretched across the courtroom. For the first time, Nathan's voice carried no arrogance. He wasn't speaking as a CEO, or even as a husband, he was simply a man confronted by the truth he could no longer bend. "I apologize for the humiliation and pain I caused her during these proceedings, and I accept the judgment rendered by this court as fair and justified." When he finished, he lowered the paper and looked down. The judge nodded, satisfied, and dismissed the court. Ava didn't move immediately. She needed a moment to let the apology settle. Not because it changed anything, but because it was the first time Nathan had spoken her name without rewriting her place in their story. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already gathering. News of the case had leaked, and though Ava had no interest in publicity, she understood its inevitability. As she stepped onto the courthouse steps, she kept her gaze low. But one camera captured the moment Nathan followed behind her, not at her side, but a few steps back, no longer leading. A journalist asked, "Do you have anything to say now that the trial is over?" Ava stopped briefly, then turned. "He said enough inside," she replied calmly. "And I said what I came here to say." Nathan lingered behind, uncertain whether to leave or attempt some last gesture. "Ava," he called softly. She turned to face him. "I know it's late, but I meant what I said." Her face was still, unreadable. "You meant it because you had to," she said. "But someday, if you can look at our child and remember who stood beside you before any of this existed, maybe you'll understand what real partnership means." She didn't wait for a response. She turned away, the courthouse behind her, the future ahead. In the weeks that followed, Ava focused on herself and her baby. With her portion of the settlement, she found a quiet apartment near the lake and decorated the nursery with soft colors and shelves full of children's books. She resumed her writing, drafting a curriculum proposal she had shelved years earlier. Each morning, she felt a little lighter. Freedom didn't mean being alone, it meant having a voice, and finally using it. Strangers had begun to send messages, women inspired by the courtroom story, saying it gave them courage to confront their own erasures. Ava never responded publicly. She didn't see herself as a symbol. She had simply chosen to stop being invisible. As her due date approached, her days were filled with quiet planning and small joys: morning tea, long walks, conversations with her sister. She attended a few sessions with a therapist, not to grieve the end of her marriage, but to understand how she had silenced herself for so long. Her therapist told her something she never forgot: you didn't lose your voice. You buried it. But you remembered how to dig. Ava nodded. She had unearthed something far more valuable than any court victory, her sense of self. 1 month after the ruling, Ava was invited to speak at a small legal symposium focused on family court reform. She almost declined. But something in her told her to go, not to relive the past, but to offer insight from someone who had lived through its quietest battles. Dressed in a soft blue maternity gown, she stood before a modest crowd and spoke without notes. When a woman gives up her career, her time, her name, it's not because she lacks ambition, she said. It's because she believes she's building something alongside someone. What we forget is that when we erase her contributions, we're not just denying her value, we're denying the truth of what partnership really is. The audience remained silent throughout, not out of indifference, but reverence. After she stepped off stage, a young law student approached her. "Thank you," the girl said, eyes wide. That was the first time I've heard someone explain it that way. Ava smiled. She didn't need applause or headlines. This was enough. She walked out of the venue the same way she had walked out of that courtroom, with no fanfare, no spectacle. Only grace. And this time, she didn't look back. Within days of the verdict, Ava's name began circulating online. A local blog had summarized the courtroom case, calling it the story of the invisible co-founder. It went viral unexpectedly. Major outlets picked it up. Comment sections exploded with debate, some criticizing Nathan's actions, others praising Ava's quiet strength. Though she had avoided public attention her entire life, now strangers quoted her testimony, shared her words, and even asked for interviews. She declined every request. Her story had already been told where it mattered most, in front of a judge, not a camera. Still, the momentum couldn't be stopped. Legal podcasts analyzed the case. Advocacy groups for women in unpaid labor cited her as an example of judicial progress. Ava didn't resist it, but she didn't embrace it either. She allowed it to pass like a storm, powerful, noisy, but not meant to define her. What mattered more was her baby's health, the nursery she had prepared, and the peace she was slowly reclaiming. The world could talk. She had already said what she needed to. For the first time in years, she didn't feel responsible for how others perceived her. She felt free. As spring approached, Ava felt something she hadn't felt in years, momentum that belonged to her. She used part of her settlement to establish a support initiative for women navigating legal battles during pregnancy or early motherhood. She called it the Quiet Anchor. It wasn't flashy. No press releases. No public launch. Just quiet funding, a small staff, and a mission to ensure that women like her didn't have to choose between stability and dignity. The program offered legal aid, transitional housing, and a network of professionals who listened without judgment. She met with survivors, single mothers, and former professionals who had been sidelined by marriage or motherhood. Ava didn't lead the meetings with speeches. Instead, she listened, offered resources, and sometimes just held space for silence. She knew the power in simply being believed. Watching other women reclaim their stories gave her a quiet joy. She wasn't trying to be a savior. She was trying to be the person she had once needed, the one who said, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." And every time she heard someone say, "This place saved me," she understood the true meaning of building something that lasts. At the request of a former professor, Ava agreed to give a guest lecture at a university's graduate seminar on family law and gender equity. Standing in front of eager young students, she spoke not as a victim or activist, but as a witness to an overlooked reality. Sacrifice doesn't always look dramatic, she told them. Sometimes, it's quietly folding laundry at midnight while a business pitch takes shape in the next room. Sometimes, it's losing your own dreams to build someone else's, hoping they'll remember. Most of the time, they don't. She paused, letting the room breathe. But the real betrayal isn't that they forget, it's that the world lets them. The students leaned forward, scribbling notes, but Ava wasn't trying to impress them. She was giving them a lens through which to see future clients not as legal puzzles, but as layered human beings. The law is not just about justice, she added, it's about visibility. Make sure the invisible ones are not forgotten. When she left the building, one of the students chased after her. Ms. Montgomery, would you ever consider teaching? Ava smiled. Maybe one day, she said, but I'm still writing my own curriculum. On a rainy afternoon, months after the case, Ava was at home folding newborn onesies when she heard a knock. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, Nathan stood there, holding an umbrella and a small bouquet. His expression was different, quieter, unsure. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. I wanted to meet him. Our son. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, but caution. He's asleep, she said. Nathan nodded, understanding. I know I lost the right to ask for anything. But I'm here now, not because I want redemption, but because I want to do something right. Ava stepped aside slowly, letting him in. The house smelled of baby powder and fresh tea. As Nathan entered the nursery, he stood silently beside the crib. He looks like you, he whispered. Ava didn't reply. She simply watched. I'll support him, Nathan added. I won't disappear. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to hold me accountable. Ava nodded slowly. This isn't about us anymore, she said. It's about who he becomes. And that starts with who we choose to be now. Nathan lowered his head. For once, it wasn't shame, it was respect. Years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Ava stood on stage at a community center, her son's small hand in hers. The banner behind her read Voices that Built Foundations. She had been asked to speak at the event celebrating women-led social impact programs. Her foundation had now helped over 200 families. She spoke briefly, never fond of the spotlight, but her words, as always, were deliberate. Strength isn't loud, she said. It's consistent. It's loving when you've been abandoned. It's standing when you're expected to crumble. The audience stood and clapped, but Ava's eyes were only on her son, now 6, smiling up at her. He tugged her arm gently. Mom, are we going home now? She bent down and kissed his forehead. Yes, we are. As they walked off stage, the crowd still cheering, she felt no pride, no vanity, just peace. The kind that comes not from winning a fight, but from surviving it without losing yourself. And as she stepped out into the sunlight, hand in hand with her son, she knew that this, finally, was the life she had fought to build.